Hey there, I'm Chris Mandell with RockShox and SRAM, and I'm out here to give you guys some pointers on how to set up the suspension on your bicycle. We're out here in sunny Bellingham, Washington, soaking up the rays, and I have an Epic Evo with a Sid Lux and a Sid fork. So Sid fork and Sid Lux rear shock. And this is what I'm going to use to talk you through suspension setup, but what I'm going to talk you through will work for any RockShox fork or shock and really any suspension that's out there. So what we're going to work through here is how you set up your bike and then how you take it out onto a section of trail and use a section of trail to give you feedback on your initial setup and then refine that setup. First place we'll start is with sag setup. So on the fork side of things, the best way to go about setting up sag and setting up your air spring is on our forks. We have an air spring chart, which is right here. But you can also go to the Trailhead app, which is a web-based app, and you can type in the serial number of your fork, and that will give you a tuning guide where you can type in your body weight, and it will help you to give you an air spring setup, which would be the amount of air that you're going to pump into your air spring. And then it'll also give you a rebound setting. And then if you have any compression adjustments on your fork, it would also help you with those. So that's how we'd start on setting up the fork. And then on the rear shock side of things, because each shock is specific to the frame and then you have to set the spring up with your body weight, we need to use the sag indicators to set up your air spring. So generally we're looking to have about 30% sag on your shock, and there's sag indicators on the damper body of the shock that you can use to do that. So a good place to start is just pump the shock up to body weight and then sit on the shock itself, sit on your bike itself. And really what we want to do here is we want to be able to consistently set sag so that from bike to bike, you can set sag up in the same way. Or if you find that you need to run a little bit more sag, like 32%, or a little bit less sag, 27 or 25%, based on the bike, you know that you can consistently get back to that exact amount of sag. So I've started off with a approximate air pressure setting based on my body weight and just kind of throwing it in there. And then what I'm going to want to do is put my hands lightly on the handlebars with my feet on the ground, and I'll bounce up and down a couple of times. And then I'll reset the O-ring on the shock, and then I'll just gently lift my feet up off the ground and then stand back up. And what that gives us is a nice consistent body weight pressure down on the shock. And what you'll find here is I've nailed 30% sag on my shock because this bike was previously set up for me. But what you'd want to do is increase or decrease the amount of air pressure that you have in the shock until this O-ring gets to the 30% mark on your bike. So we walked through how to go about the initial setup on your suspension, and then we want to work on putting that to the test and making changes to our suspension setup to get the optimal suspension performance. So what you want to have is a relatively short test track that is representative of the riding that you're going to try to do. So we're at the top of a trail that I use quite a bit for suspension setup, and it's pretty quick. There's a single track climb to the top. It takes about 5 minutes to get to the top, and then it's about 35-45 seconds of trail down to the bottom. And it has a nice drop feature that's real easy to hit and super comfortable for my personal riding style and skill. And that feature is a nice one to have because it allows me to see if I'm using full travel. And then a little bit later in the trail, it has a nice corner with a good compression in it that allows you to feel the altitude and balance of the bike front to rear. And then there's two jumps that I'm very comfortable hitting in a row. And then it's about a 5-foot jump, and then there's about a 6 or 7 foot jump. And they're real sweet because they're consistent lips. So that's a nice another feature to feel like how the bike is going to feel going up a lip and then what it feels like on the landing. And then the last portion of the trail has a straightaway section that's a little bit higher speed and a little bit rough, but the angle is not so steep that you can't stay off the brakes through it. All those features combined to give you, by the time you get to the bottom of it, a good sense of how much travel you're using as you're going down the trail, and then the altitude of the bike as you move through the travel. So the kind of things that we're looking for as we're riding down the trail is all my weight ending up on my hands. If all your weight's ending up on your hands, that might tell you that your fork is set up a little bit too soft. So you might try increasing the pressure, air pressure in the air spring of your fork. Another thing that might tell you is that your rebound on your shock is set up a little bit too fast. So rebound is personalized to the air spring setting that you have in your fork or your shock. And so you want to adjust that and make sure you're comfortable with how it feels going over bumps, off the lip of jumps. But one of the other indicators you can use to figure out if your rebound setting is right is if you feel like you're constantly getting pushed forward on the bike, that might indicate that your rebound is a little bit too fast. Again, going backwards, it could also indicate that you need a little bit more air in your fork. Conversely, if you feel like you're constantly getting peeled backwards off the back of the bike, that may mean that the air spring setup in your shock is a little bit too soft. Or if you're starting to feel some harshness in your feet and you're starting to get a little bit pushed back on your bike, that might mean that your rebound in your shock is a little bit too slow and you need to speed it up. So here we are at the drop feature that we've identified on the setup trail that we have running. And it's a really nice feature. It's not too big, it's not too small. You need to find something that fits your skill level and your comfort levels, but you also want to have something that's in line with the kind of things you're going to be riding in other places. So this drop here I use as a bottom out feature so that I know if I'm getting proper setup when it comes to my air spring and whatever bottom out features I have in my suspension. And so in this specific instance, I've just ridden off this at like a relaxed pace, landed really gently. I've left a little bit of travel on my fork, which is exactly where I want to be. And then I've fully bottomed out the rear, which is also exactly where I want to be off this feature for this bike. If I was on a longer travel bike, I would have wanted to use less travel. Another thing that's nice about this feature on this trail, and this is the reason why I like to use this, is you can also pull up off of this and go quite a bit further, which allows you to have a bigger moment, and so you can get a better idea of how your suspension is working there. So the flexibility of this feature on this setup trail is really nice because you can make it a small drop or you can make it a big drop, whichever is going to suit your needs of the bike that you're trying to set up. Again, just to reiterate, one of the things that's really important with finding your setup trail is making sure that this feature aligns to how you ride your bike and your comfort level. So this is something I'm totally comfortable with going off of many times, and you want to find the feature that works for you. Here we are at the corner and the two jumps, sequential jumps. I've just ridden through them. So one thing to note is my travel usage front to back is really consistent. So I'm leaving about the same amount of travel front to rear on the table. And that's really important because that's telling me that my bike is riding in a balanced way front to back. My personal preference is to have a bike that feels very balanced. Some people like to have a bike that's like a little bit more up in the front and has a little bit softer feel in the back. It's all personal preference. For me, balanced is really important. And what I'm seeing in this section of trail is that I'm getting very balanced travel usage, which I really like. The feature on this portion of the trail that's really nice to have is these two jumps right directly in a row. And these jumps it's about a 5-foot jump and then about a 6 or 7-foot jump. And they're jumps that I'm really comfortable with. The size of them and the shape of the lip are things that I'm personally comfortable with riding and get a lot of information out of. What's nice about them is the lips are very consistent one to the other. So when you hit the first one, the second one feels exactly the same, which is really consistent and really nice. What I try to learn from these features is as I'm going up the lip, is my bike tending to want to dip forward off the jump, or is it wanting to pull up off the jump? What's it feel like as it's coming off the lip and into the landing? What that tells me is how my rebound settings are feeling, and it helps me identify the balance of the bike front to back, which again is where these O-ring indicators are super helpful because it allows me to see how much travel I use through this section of trail. So this section of trail is a really nice one to have on your setup trail. It's relatively straight, has a little bit of roughness to it, and the gradient is such that you can ride it mostly off the brakes. It's really nice for getting a good solid feel of how your bike suspension is working underneath you. This is another section of trail where you are going to want to watch out for the amount of travel you're using. Again, you shouldn't be bottoming out on this kind of a section of trail, but you should be using a pretty good amount of travel moving through it, because you want to keep your speed up. You're watching for how your wheel is reacting to bumps on the trail, getting out of the way enough, but not so much that you're getting your weight shifted one way or another. So you should be able to ride comfortably in the middle of the bike with the wheels moving and tracking the ground, maintaining grip and traction.
And that's it for this particular suspension setup tutorial. We'd like to thank Chris from SRAM and RockShox for coming out and sharing all these helpful details. Subscribe to our YouTube channel because we've got a whole lot more helpful suspension and other how-to videos coming up.